This is where the fate of the world took a turn. After years of humanity trying to save themselves, sacrifice after sacrifice, offering after offering, animals were not enough. Priestly intercession was not enough, for these were simply a foreshadow of what was to come. The ultimate sacrifice and intercession was needed, one that would fully and finally bridge the gap for humanity to be with God once and for all, ending the 400 years of silence. So he came.
Well, happy December 2024, the 22nd. Does everybody have your shopping done? Now, I just let stress into the room. I apologize for that. Some of you are like, Terry, we're here at Christmas time to relax and to really enjoy our time. And so my name is Terry. I'm one of the pastors here. If you're brand new, welcome. I'm sorry that I did that to you. But today, we are going to continue this message series entitled The Weary World Rejoices. And the reason why I bring up gifts is because today we're going to focus a little bit on gifts. And so let me tell you a little bit about where we're going because we have a lot to cover in a short amount of time. We're going to try and do that as best as possible. But isn't it true that a lot of us, we receive gifts at Christmas, and some of those we love, and some of those we fake it? Let's just be honest in this room. You ever done that? How many of you ever got like a pair of socks and you receive it, and the person giving it to you thinks that they found the best gift ever for you, like you really wanted those gray flannel socks or whatever it is, and you get them and you have to like put that smile on your face, like, I love them. Oh, they're so great. Oh, they're so soft. Oh, look at that. Oh, the color is just perfect. And then they're looking at you and they continue to look and you're like, I have to make more things up because I don't want to disappoint them. And really the question that you're thinking about in your head is, what am I going to do with this gift? Like, I'm never going to wear it. Like, what am I going to do with this gift? And today we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do, I thought it'd be really good advice. Last week I mentioned one piece of advice for a segment of our parents of 1-year-olds, and I felt stingy because I felt like I left another parts of groups out. So I wanted to give you some advice about gifts for all of our parents in the room, okay? You ready? Here's a list. So write this down. This might be the only thing you take away from the message. I'm just saying, but just write this down because this will help you this Christmas. You ready? Here's some advice. Between birth and one, the best gifts that you can think about is really clothes and sleep. You need to get your sleep. Clothes are fine and everything else because the baby really doesn't care, and you need clothes. Trust me on that. Between 1 and 2, it doesn't matter what gift you give because remember, it's all about the packaging and it's about them ripping through the packaging and opening up. So give them empty boxes and as many as you can imagine because they'll love it. 3 years old, batteries and a father-in-law that's handy is very, very important. How many dads in this room who've been up at 3 o'clock in the morning assembling something together wish they had their father-in-law next to them? Amen. And then between 4 and 6 years, these are the best years. These are the glory years. These are amazing because they just look for those gifts and they're just so excited about them. And when you give them what they want, their just eyes light up and they just love it and they'll play with it. And it's great and it's all downhill from there. Anyway, so 7 to 10, they're going to receive less gifts and they're going to complain about it. And in fact, when they turn 7, they're going to look at you and say, well, I got more gifts last year. That's right, honey, because of inflation. Okay, now, the next one is really, really important. Okay, and so hold it here, guys. Don't yet. This next one is between the next years. It's between that, just hold it here, between 10 and 18. And the truth of the matter is that if between 7 and 10 they think they have less gifts than when they turn 11 and 12 and they want, the latest thing. I mean, my goodness gracious, right? It's just hard. So the best advice I can give parents between the ages of 10 and 18 is this: get a second job. That's it. That's all you got to do. Just get a second job because it's going to be really, really, really expensive. Now, we all have fun with that, but today we're going to really answer that question, like, what am I going to do with this gift? What am I going to do with it? And we're going to jump into the story of Christmas. And if you're new and you haven't been following, we started this series by really unpacking 400 years of history in one message. And the reason why we did it is because really to understand and embrace the Christmas story, you have to really understand the culture and the context for which it was written. And most Christians, I would say over 95% of this room and most Christians have no idea what happened in the 400 years of silence between the last prophet speaking and the birth of Christ. We just don't touch that. We don't teach on it. And you might say, well, Terry, why is that? Because I'll be honest, there's a lot of boring history in between, and you got to be crazy to try and unpack that in 31 minutes like we did in the first week. But that's what we did, and we learned a lot together. Now, here's the exciting thing, because again, I'm a history major. I taught history early before I became a pastor. And so here's what I'm excited about. Because where we left off in that week one, we left off right here at this Christmas story, right here at the time that Jesus comes in. And so what we're going to do, type A's in the room. You ready for it? We're going to unpack we're going to read a little of the Christmas story, and then we're going to dive into some history. And some of you who hate history, you're going to be bored to death. So that's fine. Just make sure the person next to you wakes you up when we get past it, okay? But we're going to learn a lot about some of the characters that led us to the time period of Jesus, because I think it's vital for us to know the context of what we're dealing with. Then once we do that, we're going to read through the Christmas story, and then we're going to be reminded of these gifts that we're talking about. What do we do with these gifts of Christmas? So let's jump into the Christmas story, Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. It says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. We're going to talk more about him. About that time, some wise men from the eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? You see, we saw his star as it rose, and we've come to worship him." And King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. Now, as Christians, we read through that and we fly by it because we want to get to Jesus, right? It's all about Jesus. We just want to get to the good stuff. But we see two things. We see a king, King Herod, who's deeply distressed, and we see it also say that everybody in Jerusalem was distressed as well. Why? Like, why were they distressed? Is it just because of culture or anything else? Well, let me teach you a little bit about that time period, because you were introduced to a man by the name of Herod. Herod was crazy, okay? When I say he was crazy, you're going to find out. How did this guy become the king in Jerusalem? Well, let's learn a little together. So the first thing that we have to know is let me take you back into history before Herod. There were two sons in 88 BC, okay? 88 BC, there's two sons. One of the sons' names was Hyrcanus, and the other one was Aristobulus, okay? Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. They had a mom who was a queen, and the queen loved her boys. Hyrcanus was the oldest son, and so in culture, biblical history, we know this. The oldest son, they receive the spoils. So mom goes ahead to Hyrcanus and says, "Hyrcanus, my baby boy, I love you. I'm going to give you a lot of power." Okay? Well, his brother Aristobulus, he was jealous. He didn't like that very much. And so sibling rivalry, they fought like cats and dogs. Now, if you were here in the first week, let me remind you. During the first week, we unpacked 400 years of that. We saw the rise of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You remember that? And the Pharisees, just to remind you, they were zealots. They were very harsh on the law. They wanted to make sure the Jewish people didn't forget where they came from, and you need to be honoring the law. Then you have the Sadducees, which was a different upper-class religious group that, yes, they liked the law, but they liked a little bit of the Grecian culture. They liked to have a little fun from time to time. And so these two groups didn't like each other very much. You had the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they were in constant battle with one another. Well, guess what happens? Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, the two brothers. Hyrcanus is weak. He's a weak man. He just goes with the flow, and he listens to everybody around him. And so all of a sudden, Hyrcanus, he kind of buddies with the Pharisees, and the Pharisees know they can control him. So they come behind Hyrcanus, and they just become his buddies. Well, now he's got the religious authority all around him. Aristobulus, he leaves and he goes to another area, but then he goes ahead and he takes a lot. Go back, don't jump me real quick, just hold on there. Aristobulus, he goes ahead and he gets buddy with who? The Sadducees. Why? Because my brother is with the Pharisees. I'm going to go to the arch enemies, and I'm going to buddy up with the Sadducees. So now we've got two siblings that are at each other's throats, vying for power in Judea, in that area. We continue and we say this. Antipater, I have to remember that, Antipater was a friend of these brothers. How many of you ever have a friend who's a manipulator? Don't raise your hand, you'll get in trouble if you do that. But how many of you know you got that friend who just loves to stir the pot? You know, that friend who just like, he'd take a grenade in the middle of a conversation, throw it out there, and just stand back to watch. Well, I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know if that's true or not, but you know. And did you hear what your brother said about that? I don't know for sure, but I'm just saying, I just heard this. You ever had that person in your life? Well, Antipater was that guy. And he was friends with the brothers. But Antipater wanted power too. So Antipater, he went ahead and started sharing stories. So watch what happens. This is, if you're falling asleep, wake up, because this is where it gets good. So all of a sudden, you have the two brothers and they're at peace with one another. I got my land over here with the Pharisees. You got your land over here with the Sadducees. We're both ruling. Okay, let's be at peace with one another. There's no sense in starting a civil war. Let's just be friends. Great. Well, Antipater is like, how am I going to get some power? I need to stir the pot. So Antipater, he gets word and grabs Hyrcanus and says, hey, I think your brother, I'm just saying, I heard he is gathering forces, and I think he wants to take over your land. He wants all the power. What? And Hyrcanus, he gets worried. He tells the Pharisees, and they all kind of gather together. They get worried, and they hatch a plan. So guess what happens? Hyrcanus, he sends word to a man in Damascus, Syria, and that man is the Caesar of Rome. His name is Pompey. And he says to Pompey, hey, just want you to know, I think you guys are great. I think the togas are awesome. The red, really nice, sharp. The soldiers, they look good. We could use your help. You see, I got a crazy brother, and they're all like wanting to start like conflict. And I know you Romans, you don't like conflict, and you haven't been over here, but would you mind just kind of coming over here and look, we'll work together. You come over here, and we'll keep my brother out. What do you think about that? Well, all of a sudden, knocked on the door for Pompey. Someone from Aristobulus comes in. Hey, Pompey, how are you? And so Pompey is getting from both factions tales of each other. Pompey decides to take the side of Hyrcanus, and Pompey and Roman soldiers come in to quell the civil unrest. They were invited into the area on behalf of both of the brothers, and then guess what happens? Rome go, I like you what I see. And Rome decides to stay, which is how Rome becomes in control of this area. They were invited in, and then they took power and occupied the Holy Land during that time. So Antipater, he causes a civil war. There's unrest. And then guess what happens? He says, you know what? I think I can probably get a little bit of audience with Pompey. Pompey dies. He starts building a relationship with Pompey because he wants power. And then all of a sudden, the next Caesar of Rome comes in. And if you were in English class, you learned a very famous story about this Caesar. And you know his name? Julius Caesar. So Antipater, goes to Julius Caesar. He wins favor. That's the next screen. He won favor with Julius Caesar, and he becomes the procurator of Judea in 47 BC. Rome hands power to Antipater. Antipater now is in control. Hyrcanus, by the way, he's a high priest, and Hyrcanus buddies up with Antipater, and so Hyrcanus has his little thing, and Antipater now is in control. Well, Terry, why did you tell us that boring history story? Because guess who is the son of Antipater? Herod. Herod and a guy by the name of Phasael, and you'll see it right here. Phasael and Herod became governors of Galilee and Judea because Antipater got old and said, you know what, I need to pass the torch. So Herod gets in control at a young age over Judea. Now, if you want to know how crazy Herod is, Herod takes control. He's in Jerusalem. He's sitting there, and he is barking orders left and right. All of a sudden, there are some Jewish zealots that are in Galilee. Galilee, the Sea of Galilee area where Jesus did most of his ministry. In this area, there's some Jewish zealots that start a problem. They start a ruckus. Well, remember, they don't like civil unrest at all. So Herod gets mad. How dare they do this under my watch? So Herod sends his army up to Galilee. They quell it. And then, to set an example to all of the people, they take the leader of the zealots and they execute him in front of everybody. Well, that's a no-no, because the Jewish priests, you can't kill somebody unless you get approval from a ruling body known as the Sanhedrin. If you've read your New Testament, you've seen that word before. The Sanhedrin is made up of Pharisees, Sadducees, priests, religious rulers that all come together to make decisions. So all of a sudden, the Sanhedrin finds out, what did Herod do? You executed a Jewish man? Like, what are you doing? You can't do that. So bring Herod in front of the Jewish council. So watch what happens. This is from an excerpt of history of the account where they called Herod to this high council meeting where they're about to condemn him and have him executed for his crimes. Take a look with me. It says, so Herod was called to account. He appeared robed in royal purple, accompanied by an armed guard, and with all the bearing of a great official rather than a person on trial for a grave offense. His manner overawed the Jewish priests and doctors who were about to acquit him when the aged president of the council, Samias, spoke out boldly for condemnation, declaring with what seemed like the voice of prophecy that if they freed Herod, this man whom they sought to absolve would one day punish them all. Stirred by the old man's fiery words, the judges decided to pronounce a sentence of death. Hyrcanus, remember Hyrcanus? He was friends with Antipater. He all of a sudden finds out that Antipater's son, he's going to be executed. He didn't like that. He wanted to get word to Herod because he felt bad for him. So all of a sudden, Hyrcanus, upon learning the intention, suddenly prorogued the council and sent word to Herod secretly to flee for his life, acquainting him with the mind of the elders. So all of a sudden, Hyrcanus warns Herod, you better get out of Dodge, they're going to kill you. Well, guess what? Herod, remember I told you he's not a nice guy? He decides, you know what, he flips his lid. He said, I don't need to listen to you. So Herod goes back to Jerusalem, and Herod used his army to slay the entire Sanhedrin, the Jewish governing party made up of Pharisees, Sadducees, and priestly family. There are over 76 documented individuals at one time that could be a part of the Sanhedrin. History tells us that he at least killed 46 of them in one moment, destroying the religious ruling council of the land of Judea and establishing himself as the crazy leader that no one dares mess with. Now, when we go back and when we said that all of a sudden these three wise men come from foreign lands and they say, hey, we saw the star, where is the child? And it said what? Herod was deeply disturbed, and so was all of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was on pins and needles because they have a madman who will flip out at any moment and kill anybody he wants. And Herod knows a prophecy of another ruler. That guy might take my job. We have to do everything we can to kill him. Now, let me tell you about these wise men. These wise men were probably from Persia, eastern lands. And they were known as Zoroastrian priests. And Zoroastrian priests, they were keepers of the fire. They were astrologers. They were highly educated. They led sacrifices in Persia, sometimes even human sacrifices. So some of these priests were of different type of culture. But these specific individuals obviously had studied Jewish culture and studied the scrolls of history and understood that when a star like it did appear, that would signal the coming of a Messiah. And so they obviously wanting to make sure, well, this might come true. Prophecy's coming true. We want to go and pay homage because, you know what? This might be a really powerful individual. So they go into Jerusalem. They go to Herod. They tell him these things. Now, here's the funny part. This is a pause. Let me come over here. This is Terry's practical moment. You ready? Because some of you are bored with history, so wake up for a second. Let me give you a little bit of fun here. In our historic timeline, we have BC and we have AD, correct? And BC is before Christ, and AD, I'll explain what it is afterwards. But all of us, most Christians in the balcony or on the floor and watching online, you've established and you think, well, some of you think that BC stands for before Christ and AD stands for after he died. No, that's not what it stands for. BC is before Christ, AD is Anno Domini. And Anno Domini means the year of our Lord. That means when the Lord came. So most of us believe in this room, the Christmas story, when Jesus hit the earth, that started 0. Most of us believe that, right? Wrong. That's actually not accurate. Historians and theologians place Jesus' birth around 4 BC. Now, I just explained BC and AD. And Terry, what is it about that? How could that be? So just to remind you, before Christ means BC. Anno Domini is the year of our Lord. And let me tell you the fun story. So how did our timeline start? Our timeline began when historians, they would look back on history and they would document and they would write and it would change the fabric of our story, right? So you had historians who obviously believe, oh, he is the Son of God. So that changes the timeline. So historians, they marked the kings of old, and when they marked it all the way down, at the point of Christ's birth, the early historians went ahead and said, okay, this is when Jesus was born, so that becomes 0, and then now we have AD. So here's the fun part. For 6 centuries, they followed this timeline. And a man by the name of Dionysius, he was a famous historian, wrote a lot of our Western Civ. Dionysius, he went back and said, you know what, I love this, and I want to look for myself, and I want to look at all the elders and all the kings, and I want to understand that a little bit more. So he studied all of them. And when he got to Herod, he realized the early historians had made a mistake. The early historians had thought that Herod was moving, and hold that, guys, don't jump me. They thought that Herod died at a certain point, but they were mistaken. He died 4 years later. So the reason why Jesus was born in 4 BC is because of the following. This mistake was discovered in the 6th century, and it would have messed with the timeline, so they kept the timeline the same. So we live with a timeline that's off by 4 years. Jesus was actually born in 4 BC, which is why many times as Christians we look at the history and we just don't understand why it doesn't make sense. Now, what does that have to do with the gift and the Christmas story? Nothing. It was just a practical tip from Terry. There you go. All right, moving on. So Herod's in the building. We continue on in Matthew chapter 2, verse 4. It says, he called a meeting of the leading priests and the teachers of the religious law, and he asked them, where is the Messiah to be born? In Bethlehem in Judea, they said. For this is what the prophet wrote, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah. For a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd for my people Israel. What I love about this story is really what we're reading is the moment in history where God decided to give mankind a gift. And if you really think about it, it was the strangest gift that anyone could understand. And Herod, when he heard the news, he was greatly distressed about this gift. It's almost like he was receiving a gift he didn't want, like a pair of old socks. I want to tell you a story that might, as we wrap things up and move toward the end here. My first mission trip was to Moscow, Russia in 1998. And being a historian and social studies professor or teacher, I was just overjoyed to be able to one day be able to walk into the former Soviet Union, which I never thought I would be able to because of the Cold War. And one of the things that I learned is at that time in about 1994 to about 2000, Russia had invited envoys from America to bring teachers into this country. And the reason that they did is they wanted, number one, they wanted to learn more English. But number two, they wanted their children to have a moral fabric that was missing. So they invited religious teaching to develop moral compass and moral teaching. So my church in Fort Lauderdale, we for years brought teams of people to English camps where we teach Bible stories and share Christ with kids in orphanages. Well, there's a story in 1994 about a group from America that went over to Russia. And they went to an orphanage, and they sat down with this group. And it brings me joy because we did the same thing in our church. But what they did is in order to tell the Christmas story, they would bring napkins that were yellow, and the kids could cut strips of the yellow paper for a straw. And they brought cardboard so they could develop their own manger scene and place the yellow for the straw and really design something. And so the exercise, which we did as well, was that each of these kids were told the Christmas story. And all these children, by the way, if you ever went there, when you shared with them, they were locked in. And so you tell them about this gift that God gave them and how Jesus wants to be in their life and gives them eternity. And they are overwhelmed. And then you tell them, now, we want you to take that Christmas story and we want you to create a manger scene. So each of these children from ages 4 to about 12 years old, they each gather their supplies and they start making their manger scene. Kids are cutting and the adults are watching. And all of a sudden when they're finished, the adults start looking and examining their manger scene. And as they examine, they see them and they encourage them and see them and encourage them. They got to the end for a little boy by the name of Misha. Misha, a 4-year-old boy, had developed his manger scene. And they look and they see the cardboard and they see the straw and they look at the manger, and there was something different about his manger. You see, his manger didn't have one baby. It had 2. So worried that Misha didn't understand the Christmas story, the Russian teacher brought the English faction over to explain it. And a wise English teacher looked at Misha and said, Misha, let me ask you a question. Can you tell me the Christmas story that you heard? So little Misha, 4 years old, articulates the Christmas story exactly the way that it was taught. Except he changed the ending. And he personalized it. Misha looked up at the English teacher and said, I placed Jesus in the manger. And Jesus asked me if I would come be with him. But I told Jesus I couldn't. And the reason why I couldn't is I have no mama, I have no papa, and I have no gift that I can give you. Jesus then, this is Misha's words, Jesus said to Misha, that's okay, you can still come. But Misha, knowing that it was not appropriate in his culture to come freely and take advantage, he thought, I have to bring a gift. So Misha says, so I asked Jesus, would it be okay if I give you a gift of warmth? Can I come in, and if I bring you warmth, would that be gift enough for you? And then Jesus, this is Misha, Jesus responded to Misha, that would be the greatest gift you could ever give me. I would love for you to stay with me. And after Misha said that, he broke down and he started crying. And the teacher asked him, Misha, why are you crying? And he said, I have no mama, and I have no papa, and I have no home. But yet Jesus says he'll be with me forever, and I can stay with him forever. What an amazing gift that a 4-year-old understood the significance of. I think this Christmas, a lot of us, we get a lot of gifts and we don't think twice. I'm guilty of it. But we forget about the greatest gift ever given. And that gift was laid at the feet of a man by the name of Herod. But let's finish the story and see what happens. It says Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. And then he told them, go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me so that I may go and worship him too. We all know that Herod had no intent, because you would see him declare an edict to have all the baby boys under the age of 2 killed because he felt threatened. So the story finishes. After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star that they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was, and when they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed and they worshiped him, and then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And when it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. I think at that moment, those wise men probably thought, isn't it wonderful what I'm giving to the king? And just like us, we end up thinking those thoughts. But Christmas really is about one question. That's, what are we going to do with this gift that's been given to us? I close, I've got 2 minutes. I close with this. There was a man on a train from Chicago all the way down to Houston. I think it was Houston. Anyway, it doesn't matter because he stopped in Atlanta. The bus stops in Atlanta. And the story goes, as the man got out of Atlanta, it was a stop, and they went inside to eat. And a mother came out of a bathroom and walked up to a gentleman sitting at the counter where he was eating, and she had a baby in her arms. True story. And she looked at the man, and she goes, oh, I forgot my purse. And would you do me a favor? Would you just hold my baby for a second so I can go in and grab my purse? And he said, sure. So he holds the baby, and the mother starts walking toward the bathroom. The man looks down at the baby, and he looks up, and he assumes she went in the bathroom. 5-10 minutes pass, and the mother doesn't return. Frantic, the man gets up and he has someone check the bathroom. They can't find the mother. And they look outside and they search everywhere for the mother and they can't find her. See, reality is after they found the baby and after they reported everybody, there was a woman that reported their child missing. The woman that handed the baby had kidnapped the child and decided at the last moment to hand the baby off to a stranger. And I want you to imagine yourselves in that man's shoes if you were sitting there. What would you do with that baby? Would you leave the baby and run and try to find him? Would you hand the baby off to someone else because you're like, I don't want to deal with this? What would you do with that baby? And it goes back to our question, what would you do with the gift? Because God gave you a baby. And his name is Jesus. And he's laid it into your hands. And there are some of us in this room that we are holding on to that baby. We are thankful for that baby. We understand exactly what that baby does and did for me. And there are some of us that we say that we're Christians, and I believe that. However, if we were really honest, we receive that baby and we place that baby down somewhere else and we go off and we have our own fun. Because we don't take care of that gift and appreciate that gift that God has given us. So maybe, just maybe, this Christmas, what can I do with that gift? If you're married in this room and you're arguing, one of the ways that you honor that baby is by realizing, you know what? Life is short. Maybe the best thing I can do with this baby is to listen to it from his word. And maybe this is the Christmas that we break down walls and we communicate better. Maybe if I'm a parent in this room and I'm estranged from my kids, maybe I listen to this baby a little bit and what it teaches me. And maybe this Christmas is the Christmas I put down my pride and I pick up the phone and I call and say, I know it's been a while, but Merry Christmas. Maybe this Christmas, if you don't know what that gift is, the best thing that you could do is actually open it and actually receive it and actually understand it's the greatest gift that's ever been given. And it's a gift that would change your life. So this Christmas, what are you going to do with that gift? The choice is ours. But I pray you learn from a man who had a heart and from a 4-year-old boy who understood its significance. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this message. And God, as we approach Christmas, Lord, we're in the hustle and bustle of things. We're thinking of the gifts and the food and the supplies we have to get. But God, you're really wanting us to slow down. And so God, may we all know what to do with this gift. And may this gift change Christmas forever. We love you and bless you in Jesus' name.